In the high desert, after 3 days without food or water, a lone rancher collapsed near the edge of a canyon, certain he would die where no one would find him. But he was found, not by rescuers, but by women in painted buckskin who should have left him. They carried him into a world no map marked and healed him in silence. He thought he was a guest. He was wrong. Their leader, a dying queen, saw him as something else, a sign. What he didn't know was that their survival, and his own redemption, would depend on one impossible choice. And a stranger from his past was already writing to collect a debt. What happened next would rewrite everything he thought he knew about blood, legacy, and belonging. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? The last light of the canyon burned like a dying ember when Seth McAllister staggered across the ridge, dust caked in the cracks of his skin and the taste of thirst scraping his throat. His horse had bolted hours earlier, leaving him alone with the echo of his own breathing and the vast red silence stretching out in every direction. He took one more step, then another, until the ground tilted and he dropped to his hands, feeling the grit bite into his palms. Only then did he notice the stillness, not the quiet of emptiness, but the quiet of being watched. Figures stood along the jagged stones above him, women in painted buckskin, faces unreadable in the bruised dusk. None spoke, none moved. When Seth looked up and tried to rise, the world swayed, and the ridge swallowed him into black. He woke to heat and shadows flickering across a stone ceiling. His wrists were bound with braided sinew, his breath fogging in the warm air of an underground room carved into the cliffside. Firelight revealed shelves of dried herbs, clay pots, and a circle of women seated in silence. One stepped forward, older than the rest, her face marked in white clay and crimson lines that gave her the gravity of someone who answered only to the land itself. She knelt beside him, studying him as if reading a wound beneath the skin. "You crossed the boundary," she murmured. "The earth may now ask something in return." Her eyes sharpened. "Tell me, rancher, what does your blood carry?" Seth blinked against the smoke curling through the stone chamber, her words still hanging in the firelit air. "What does your blood carry?" His throat worked, but nothing came. Only the ache behind his eyes and the heat pressing down on him like a second skin. And then, as if stirred by her voice, the memories came. A steer, broken-horned and wild-eyed, had veered off during the storm, bolting straight into the hills. Seth had followed without thinking, rain slicing sideways, his hat lost to the wind, the world vanishing beneath hooves. For days he chased the ghost of that animal, pride too stubborn to admit he'd gone too far. The trail dissolved. The water ran out. His horse went down somewhere past the third canyon rim, and Seth kept walking until the desert took him to his knees. They could have left him, and maybe they should have. He wasn't one of them. He wasn't anything but a half-dead rancher who'd crossed into sacred land with no offering, no reason. But still, they carried him, up through the red rock, through a slit in the stone no map ever marked, into a quiet hive of cliffside dwellings where women moved like wind through juniper and ash. He'd been fevered for days, and when he woke, the woman in white paint had been there. Now she leaned back as another stepped forward, an elder with silver braided into her hair and a weathered bundle in her hands. She set it down before him, disc and wrap, tied with sinew. Inside, a single yellowed ledger page, brittle as bark. Fort Lincoln, 1859. His eyes locked on the name inked in the margin, McAllister. Next to it, 4 taken, 1 recovered, others sold. Seth stared. "My grandfather," he began, but the words felt hollow. "We remember names," the elders said quietly, "even when others forget." Seth's fingers hovered above the page. "I didn't do this." Casa didn't flinch. "But the blood that did is still warm in your chest." The fire cracked. Silence settled. Around him, a dozen women watched, not with hatred, but with centuries behind their eyes. They had saved his life. Now they were waiting to see what he would do with it. By the 5th day, Seth could stand without the stone wall catching him. The fever was gone, but the weight hadn't lifted. Every time he stepped into the narrow corridors of the cliffside dwellings, the women paused, not hostile, but elate, like watchers deciding whether a fire might spread or warm. He asked to leave. Casa didn't raise her voice. You would not reach the third ridge before the desert takes you. I've ridden worse country, he muttered. The country is not what waits, she said. Eyes are watching, and only one path lives. He followed her gaze to the canyon rim, where the rocks shimmered in the heat and shadows blinked where they shouldn't. He began to feel the walls closing in, not by force, but by absence. No maps, no horses, no markers of time. Only ritual fires each night, women dancing in slow turns, smoke curling like questions into the stars. The air was thick with meaning he didn't understand. You didn't save me, he said finally. You could have left me to rot. Casa looked at him across the flames. We did not save you, she said. We claimed you. The word hit harder than a chain. Some women eyed him like a threat, a crack in the stone. Others watched him like a seed. They murmured around the fires, if he stays, our line lives. The tribe was thinning. Too many daughters, no sons, no men unbroken by war or whiteness or grief. One evening, he sat beside a young woman named Sonny, quiet and clear-eyed, her voice like rain on dust. She didn't speak like the others. They think you're a sign, she said. And you? I think signs can lie. He looked at her, unsure if it was warning or invitation. She held out a carved pendant of cedar and bone. They want you claimed. I want you to choose. In that moment, something shifted, not around him, but within. They had pulled him from death, but now they asked for something more. A future, a bond, maybe even a child. And as the fire flickered and Sonny's eyes held his, Seth felt the canyon tighten, not as a prison, but as a place that wouldn't let him pass until he answered something larger than survival. Was he still a man just trying to get home? Or had home become something else entirely? Seth turned the pendant over in his palm, long after Sonny had gone. Its smooth weight felt less like a gift and more like a question he wasn't ready to answer. He stayed into the fire, watching its center pulse with soft breath. The canyon held its silence, but something had shifted, like the wind had turned. By morning, the drums began. Not loud, not hurried, just steady, like a heartbeat too big to belong to one body. He stepped out into the open square carved from stone and found the women gathering. Faces painted in ochre and black. Fire pits lit. Offerings stacked in baskets. Grain, bone, river stone. At the center stood Casa, wrapped in a white mantle, her breath shallow in the cold morning air. I am leaving, she said, not to Seth, but to the sky. Not today, but soon enough for the earth to start looking. Seth stepped closer. Leaving where? Casa turned. Her face was pale beneath the paint. Every queen returns to dust. But before she does, she names what grows next. A hush fell. It cannot be only wisdom, she said. It must be blood. Your presence was not an accident, Seth McAllister. It was a summons. His mouth went dry. You want me to father a child. Not just any child, Casa said. A child that carries two worlds. One that no army can erase. Seth backed away. No, I didn't come here for this. But the desert brought you, she answered. He turned toward the canyon pass, but two women blocked the way. Not threatening, just standing, watching. You said I could leave. You can, Casa said, when the moon turns. Until then, the path seals. Not by us, by the land. That night, the ritual fires returned. But they were quieter now, as if listening. Sonny approached, eyes solemn. You don't have to be chosen, she said. You can choose. He looked at her, truly looked. Not just the grace in her hands, but the pain in her stillness. You'd want that. She placed her hand on his chest. If you stay because you believe, not because you owe. Then came the ceremony. The ledger, the one with his grandfather's name, was burned. Ash rising into the night as Casa declared, we remember, but we do not chain the living to the dead. Seth's chest tightened. Then he saw it, a flicker on the far ridge. A rider, lone, familiar, the shape of a man chasing old debts. A bounty hunter, from his past. Casa followed his eyes. You can walk back to a world that hunts you, or forward to one that needs you. The fire cracked, the pendant still warm in his palm. If a forgotten people asked you to carry their future, would you say yes? Seth stood between fire and shadow, between the blood behind him and the life ahead. And still, the drums beat, slow, steady, waiting. The pendant in Seth's hand caught the last light as the rider crested the ridge. Price. Even at that distance, Seth knew the man's shape, too lean, too calm, like a rattler coiled just before the strike. The bounty hunter hadn't aged, only hardened. And he hadn't come for forgiveness. The fire behind Seth crackled low. Around him, the women stood in silence, their faces turned not in panic, but in recognition. They had waited for many things: drought, wind, death. They would wait for this too. Seth didn't flinch as Price descended the path. Dust curled in his wake like a warning. At the canyon floor, he dismounted slowly, hand resting near the stock of his rifle, boots thudding soft against the rock. "You ran far, McAllister," he said, "but not far enough." Seth stepped forward, the firelight licking the edge of his shirt. "I didn't run. I chose to stop." Price's eyes flicked to the crowd. "These women hiding you." Before Seth could answer, Casa moved. She emerged from the shadows like smoke from a cedar fire, slow, deliberate, draped in white. Her steps were light, but her voice, when it came, carried farther than the canyon walls had ever echoed. "He is ours," she said. English. The first time he'd heard it from her lips. Every woman behind her stood straighter. Price frowned. "He owes blood. Law doesn't change just because he found a place to squat." Cass's face didn't change. "He has paid." Seth didn't know if she meant the debt from long ago, or what he'd carried since arriving. But the word struck true. The women moved forward. Not with weapons, just presence. A wall of bodies shaped by grief, endurance, and the right to decide who stood among them. Price hesitated. His fingers hovered near the gun, then dropped. "You always did pick the hard road," he muttered. Then he turned, mounted up, and vanished the way he'd come. Only when the hoofbits were gone did Seth let out the breath he'd been holding. Cass's knees buckled. Two women caught her, easing her to the ground like she was something wholly returning to the earth. The fires were fed. Smoke lifted. Morning began. And when Sonny stepped forward to take her place, Seth didn't speak. He only stood beside her, not asking, not proving, just remaining. He had not been saved, not claimed. He had chosen. And now, he belonged. The fire burned low that night, its smoke rising slow as breath over Cass's still form. No one spoke, not even the wind. By morning, a circle of stones marked where she had lain. Nothing carved, nothing claimed. Just earth receiving its elder. Seth stood beside Sonny as the sun breached the canyon rim, his hand still in hers. He didn't ask what came next. Neither did she. The answer was already moving in both of them. Years passed, quietly, and one day, a boy rode the upper trail with his mother, dust kicking soft beneath his pony's hooves. He pointed to a bend where the canyon narrowed and whispered changed. "There," he said, "is where the last queen changed the wind." Sonny rode behind him, calm and steady. At the overlook stood a figure in the shadows, older now, lined by sun and silence, a carved pendant still resting on his chest. Below, the cliff dwellings breathed with laughter and song. The tribe endured. On the river bank, the boy scattered ashes from a deer-hide pouch, what remained of a legend no longer needed. And the water carried a whisper: "Blood doesn't bind us. Choice does. If you believe legacy is earned, wait until you hear the story of the woman who crossed the border with only a knife and a child."